Today I'm going to show you how to build your own terrarium for snakes using OSB. To get an initial visual impression and check that everything fits together well, we lay out all the parts and secure them with masking tape. Once everything is in place and fits, we start screwing the sides to the lid and the base. When screwing in the first screws, you have to be very careful to ensure that the OSB boards are aligned precisely with each other. I marked all the holes, pre-drilled and countersunk them, and then screwed them together. Pre-drilling ensures that the screw is guided straight and cannot be screwed in at an angle. Countersinking prevents the OSB from tearing at the screw head. First I marked the distance between the screws so that they were all the same distance apart. Then I marked the distance from the edge, which gave us an intersection point where we could drill. I apologize in advance for the video quality. I built the entire project in a small 24 square meter student room. Sometimes in daylight, sometimes at night, without proper lighting. Since I also lived in this room, I cleaned it often and thoroughly in between. Corn snakes are slender snakes, also known as climbing snakes, which means they are good at climbing and enjoy doing so. That's why we are designing the terrarium to meet these needs. More on that later. In the first small terrarium, I noticed that the corn snakes also like to burrow through the ground. That's why the substrate will be at least 10 cm deep and made of loose material. The dimensions of the terrarium depend on the animals that will be living in it. You can always build it a little bigger. In my case, the space on the top of a cabinet determined the dimensions. In my room there was a sideboard with a width of 120 cm and a depth of 50 cm. That's how I arrived at my base area. The height of the terrarium is determined by the optimal use of the size of an OSB board and is 60 cm. I made the sketch with all the dimensions and material thicknesses and had the OSB board cut to size at the hardware store. This worked without any problems at my hardware store. Later I had all the cuts made again for another project at a different hardware store. There I was told that this is not common practice. Actually, the employees at the hardware store only do a few rough cuts and no detailed work. So with a little luck you may be able to get all your cuts done at the hardware store. Today, however, you can also order everything online. It took 40 minutes to screw the entire body together. Allow enough time for a project like this and don't think you can do it in an afternoon. Then we take care of the interior. First we sealed all the edges with acrylic. Then I lined the sides and back wall with 5 cm thick styrofoam panels. Don't cut the panels too small, so that they fit snugly and stay in place. Now comes the part where we can get creative. The styrofoam panels serve two purposes. They insulate the terrarium and give us depth from which we can create shapes. In doing so, we try to cater to the specific needs and movements of our animals. We build platforms and dig passages into the walls. Using a knife, I worked my way forward piece by piece until I have the shape that I liked. I cut and scraped in parts. A vacuum cleaner was my best friend during this time. We want to remove all these flakes as quickly as possible. Then I took my leftover pieces and looked how they might fit into the terrarium. I marked 2 points on the styrofoam and drew a curved line between them freehand. In order to build a deep hollow, I used my first piece as a template and cut it out again. I made this cut at an angle to save myself some work. I secured all the components with toothpicks, including the 2 pieces that were to form the hollow. After checking that the pieces fit together well, I separated them again and glued them together with acrylic. On the other side, I try to create as nice a surface as possible from the remaining piece. Because it looks nicer, I built a support for this surface from another piece. Better late than never. I am now sealing all the edges between the styrofoam panels and the terrarium. Simply apply a small bead and then smooth it out with your finger. A resin is a very useful tool for sharpening styrofoam. The disadvantage is that it makes a lot of mess. I make sure that the flakes always fell into the terrarium. This reduces the effort required to remove the flakes. Another good way to produce a lot of flakes quickly is to use a cordless screwdriver with a large drill bit. In addition to producing a lot of flakes, you can also make quick progress. To make the hollow on the left side look more natural, I transferred the shape to the side wall and now working it out to match. There was too much smooth surface in the middle for my liking, so I couldn't leave it like that. However, simply creating a narrow recess seemed too boring to me. So I took the leftover pieces, glued them together and attached them in the middle. Again, I did some fine work with the rasp, so that it no longer looked like cut up styrofoam. The recess on the front breaks up the appearance of only smooth surfaces. Here's a pan through the terrarium. As you can see, I still thought it looked like there were too many smooth surfaces. I added another step on the right under the platform. A small platform was also added in the middle. It's not big enough to lie on, but it's helpful for gliding over. On the left I milled out a long passage to give the snakes different paths to take. So much for the design of the walls. Now that we finally finished producing flakes, we can move on to the next step. Later the walls will be plastered with gypsum. So we apply an adhesive primer to ensure that it sticks to the styrofoam. Simply brush everything once. It's as easy and as boring as it sounds. Now I've noticed I've forgotten to provide ventilation. So let's quickly remedy that. In the terrarium there should always be airflow through the entire terrarium, from bottom to top or from left to right. Ventilation at the bottom right and top right is not ideal. This would result in limited air exchange on the left side. My solution is to have air intake at the bottom right and left and air exhaust on the top center. Use a hole saw to cut a hole of the appropriate size and transfer the hole to the inside with something long. No saw from the inside. Damn, flakes again. Since this hole saw cannot drill deep enough, we finish the rest with a knife and a rasp. We apply another coat of primer to the styrofoam. Now we coat the inside with plaster, tie adhesive, filler or something similar. I bought a product called Super Clever at the hardware store. It's a tie adhesive. I choose it because it's solvent free and I don't have to mix it myself. It's ready to use, which was important to me in my student room. I bought 12 kilograms. I don't remember how I came up with this amount. I simply applied it with a brush. I didn't pay attention to any details. I just applied it and that was it. You can tell that the base is styrofoam afterwards. We don't try to apply it particularly smoothly either. The more uneven it is, the better. In the area of the substrate, where you can't see it anyway, I opted for a smooth surface. This is easier to clean. To do this I took a piece of plastic and smoothed it out. After it dried, I sprayed the designed areas with acrylic varnish. I chose 2 similar shades of sand. I sprayed both colors, one after another. I can't say why anymore, as I built the terrarium in 2014. Then I checked the edges to see if the rails for the glass panes fit. I carefully removed any excess filler with a utility knife before moving on to the next step. To give the snakes something to grip on, I sprinkled sand on the last layer of epoxy resin. This is just normal sand I took from a small pile outside. I washed the sand thoroughly, dried it in the oven and disinfected it with heat. I mixed the epoxy resin with the hardener according to the instructions. I used a kitchen scale and a few old yogurt pots. If you don't know how quickly you can brush it on, it's best to mix a small amount of epoxy resin first. The processing time is only about 20 minutes. Then brush the epoxy resin evenly and quickly over the entire surface. Let the first coat dry and apply a second coat the next day. Now we can better estimate the time and how much epoxy resin we need. After applying the second coat, we will sprinkle sand on it. That's the whole trick for creating a rough surface on which snakes can move around easily. For the lighting, I bought a small spotlight and removed everything I didn't need. I screwed the rest onto one half of the ceiling. This creates a warmer and a colder area in the terrarium. I cut the end of the strips at a 45-degree angle. Then I hold two strips together and checked and adjusted the angle. The strips for the paints have a W profile and offer two grooves in which the paints can move. To create a uniform look, I attach the strips all around. Normally, you would attach a strip with double the height on the top. This allows you to remove the paints later. I decided against it. I wanted the white frame to be the same width all around. This meant that I had to insert the paints together with the top strip, and there is no way to remove the paints. I had the paints made by a local glazier. Glazier said, people used to come in and have two paints of the same size made. I confirmed that I also needed the paints for a terrarium. The strips are glued to the rest of the acrylic. Of course, OSB does not have the most attractive surface. It is not really suitable as a visual highlight in the living room. To achieve this, we would now have to build a font that matches our interior design. Let's move on to the final steps. For the paints, I bent a small hook out of wire. I attached a small magnet underneath it. This holds the lever down and I can hang the hook there when I want to slide the paints open. I glued 2 bent metal sheets as handles using some acrylic. That was the step-by-step guide to building a terrarium. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. Bye, see you next time.